All right, everyone. I'm joined by Ty Franck, one half of the Expanse Archon. That is James S.A Corey. How you doing, Ty? On this
Good.
fine evening.
I love that the Expanse Archon. That's like
Yeah,
only
steal it right from Tasteosis.
only a StarCraft nerd would know what that means.
I came prepared. All right, I had that bit planned out minutes in advance. But you just released season 4 of the Expanse, and I didn't actually know all the drama behind it, but after getting, I guess, canceled by Sci-Fi, it was picked up by Amazon, and now you're on Amazon Prime. So how did it feel after getting canceled? Was it legitimately like, well, I guess the show's over, or did you have talks already going, or I don't know how much you can say on that, but how did it feel after getting picked up after the show was dropped and so many people obviously liked it?
Yeah, so that's a common misconception. So we were never owned by Sci-Fi, so they couldn't cancel us.
Oh,
What they could do was choose not to buy more seasons to air on their channel. And so they let us know they were not going to air more seasons on their channel, but we still own the show. Out by we, I mean Alcon Entertainment, which is the studio that produces the show. So Alcon, because they owned the show free and clear, could take it anywhere. So they started talking to Netflix and Amazon and a couple other places, and it was really clear early on that Amazon was the front runner. But it was still a surprise when Jeff Bezos himself announced that they had decided to buy it.
that's how you know you made it with Amazon. A nice patron to have. Now, so what we're gonna do, guys? I picked out an episode. I picked this episode. It's season 4, episode 5. Partially because there's not as much action as the other episodes. It's a little bit easier to talk over, I guess. And I think it has a little more. There's a lot more of the. My favorite part of the season, even though I think if you just watch the show, was what's happening on Earth, as opposed to all the other parts of the show. I really like the like future politics and all that. And while it didn't go too in depth because the season was, it just kept going, so much going on. But this is the episode I chose. And all right, I'm gonna give everybody a chance if we're watching live. We're not gonna skip the intro because I want to talk about the intro as well. But you got it. You got it. You got your own stuff, Tyler. Or do you just have it by memory?
I assume I'll remember. I've seen every episode about 1,000 times.
Yeah, you were pretty involved in that. Oh, for those who don't know, not only is he one half of the writers of the books, the Expanse series, but also you write and produce on the show as well. Like you're very involved. It's not like the people are taking the books and running with them. You're actually there as part of the show, correct?
Yeah, I'm an executive producer on the show, and that's not just in name only. I actually write, along with my partner Daniel, we write about a third of the episodes. I personally produce about half of them.
Well, there you go. So some intimate knowledge here. All right, I'm gonna get the timer set up. I've never tried this particular setup, so if things go wrong, well, things go wrong. But uh, three, oh, 3, 2, 1, and start. So the first part is, of course, the intro. It's the same theme throughout all the seasons. How did the intro come about? Because this is what hooked me right off the bat. I'm like, oh, this is a real sci-fi show. Like it didn't focus so much on the characters, but on just I guess the universe of the Expanse, which I really liked. So just talk to me about the intro.
Yeah. So I got to give full credit to our showrunner, Narain Shankar. That was almost entirely his vision. The theme music is the very first attempt at it that our composer did. He just sent something over and said, "Hey, what do you think of this? Something along this lines for the opening theme." And Narain said, "Yes, polish that up, and that is exactly what we're going to use." So it was pretty easy on that side. As far as the imagery and stuff, Narain has never said so, but I always felt it kind of felt like the movie um, Watchmen, where the opening credits kind of take you through 40 years of history in just sort of little vignettes. It's sort of that. It's the Earth drowning from the rising waters from global warming, and then people colonizing the moon, and people colonizing Mars, and sort of going out to the asteroid belt. And like each step of humanity's expansion out into the solar system is sort of a quick little vignette in that opening title sequence.
Yeah, I definitely want to get more into like the backstory of the universe, but that's for after the episode because I think that's a more in depth discussion. But what I noticed is this scene is on Eyeless, where but all the scenes on Eyeless are in this more letterbox
Yeah,
format, whereas anything in the solar system, I thought that was I didn't even notice it for a couple episodes. Like I registered it, but I didn't notice it what was happening. So I think it's really cool because you instantly know where you are, like in the split second when it switches scenes, which makes the pacing a lot better. But can you talk about that?
yeah. Yeah, it's actually different lenses. We're using panoramic lenses. They're a 239 aspect ratio. Not only do they give you a wider view, but they actually change the way the camera sees the scenery. And if you look at the very edges, there's this weird slight curving at the edges. It feels very old. It feels very Western. It just adds a completely different flavor to it. It's what we're accustomed to seeing when we're watching movies with like big panoramic shots of nature and that kind of stuff.
Honestly, the whole story on Eyeless kind of felt like a Star Trek movie to me, too. Like just the way it looked and it felt like the show this season felt like on Eyeless you have kind of I don't know if that's an insult or a compliment, but it kind of felt like a Star Trek movie. And then there's a whole nother show
Well, it
going
depends
on in
on
the
which
solar
movie.
system. That's fair. We'll just say whatever your favorite is and the best one. But just
If
like
it's Star
the
Trek
feel of
5,
it.
I'm really offended.
Of course not. Wait, is that the one where they save the whale from San Francisco?
No, that's the one where they fight God.
Oh, I forget if they win. Do they win? They usually win.
Yeah, no, they win because Spock shoots God with a laser. God is very not laser resistant.
God really should have planned that out better. That's another point though. Like with sci-fi, and this is another thing for after more in depth. But like, how do you deal with the what is it? I always butcher it when I say it. Deus Ex Machina, where it's like,
Deus Ex
well,
Machina.
alien science magic now solves all your problems. So let's like the give and take on that.
Yeah, I mean, we're always aiming for what we call a Wikipedia level plausibility, where the things that happen feel like things that are real. When you watch them happen, they feel like something that would happen in the real world and doesn't throw you out of the story. And we almost never, and I'm going to go ahead and say never, except for one glaring example, uh, use technology to solve a problem where the technology is completely bullshit. Because it always drove me nuts when it's like, oh no, the aliens are attacking. Well, if we reroute tachyons through the warp plasma conduit and alter the polarity of the deflector array, the aliens can't withstand that. Like everything you just said is bullshit, and so it's like a completely arbitrary problem with a completely arbitrary solution. There's no drama in that. It just feels like, oh, okay, they tech the tech and that solved the problem.
Yeah, that's like the bordering on Star Wars level, like science fantasy versus science fiction. I think
Except that Star Wars, at least with Star Wars, it always feels like everything is the same.
it's
Like once you
consistently
understand,
bullshit.
it's consistent, but it's consistently bullshit. Like once you understand Star Wars tech, it always kind of works that way. Not every franchise is quite that internally consistent, and that's all I ask from my sci-fi or my fantasies. Just be internally consistent. That's all I want.
Yeah, I noticed in the books it expands a lot more on this. I feel season 3 for those who didn't read the books, season 3 when they're going in the ring, it can get a little like wait, what's going on here? Like, what are the rules? They explain the laws of physics no longer exist, but there's still a motivation behind each thing that happens, and there's a justification, like a self defense mechanism or something like that. So at least that makes sense, but I think that's the closest. Like, this season, honestly, it did feel a lot like the proto molecule, which got a lot of action in the first 3 seasons, was kind of a sideshow despite driving all the events. So uh, I noticed. I guess I didn't really have a question on the end of that, but can you talk about like the proto molecule specifically, and just what kind of discussions did you have adapting it to the show?
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing is, at the end of season three, the protomolecule has done its job. It's finished. We actually have somebody say it's a road builder. It only existed to build a road. It has now built the road. Uh, so at that point, it's sort of like you got to move on. You got to do something else. So the central mystery stops being what does the protomolecule do, and starts becoming okay. Somebody built these roads. What happened to them? Where are they now? You got to, if you're going to keep it fresh and you're going to keep it interesting, you've got to constantly be looking for the next version of the mystery. It can't be the same mystery played over and over and over again. That just gets boring.
Now I'm talking about all these general things, but I want to talk about how, let's be honest here, that um I forget his name. Amazon usually says it on the side. But Murtry's character plays the same character in everything he's in, but it fits perfectly. Like,
Burn Gorman.
I think there's he has a line in this episode where he's like, maybe I just have that kind of face, but he definitely does. Like, was there much of a casting for that character, or
Yeah, I mean, we looked for a long time to find the right person, and actually Burn became available and was brought to us through the casting people very late in the process. But once he showed up, I mean, you take one look at that face, and you go, "Yeah, that's our guy." But the nice thing about Burn is he has this intensity to him, but he never like twirls his mustache.
yeah,
He never seems villainous for the sake of being villainous. He always seems very intensely trying to accomplish a goal. In this case, his goals are not good for our settlers, but they're understandable goals. Like I understand why he's doing what he's doing. Um,
you've seen people like that before today. Like there are those people
yeah,
out there. It's a real
for
person.
sure,
What
for sure. Yeah,
Speaking of, we have Eva Sarala, which is one of my favorite characters. I mean, it's hard not to like her. But just talking about the bullshit political stuff here. And so there was a character switch for Arjun, her husband. Was that what was the details behind that?
yeah. No, so that is nothing more than Brian. So Brian George is the actor who played her husband in the first season. Brian got another job. He was cast as a regular on a sitcom. We tried to make the dates work. We love Brian. We would love to have had him back, but we just couldn't make the dates work. So we were in a position where we had to recast that part.
I mean, the well, look, Michael Ben. I'm bad with names, but I recognize the characters. I think he did a great job of kind of like contrasting Eva Sarala this season, who kind of feels like she goes off the deep end a little bit, but I think it does
Yeah,
tie it all together. Like how she's all like, why are you guys talking about this? This isn't important right now. But can you just talk about her as a character and all that?
yeah. I mean, so yeah. So the thing with the Vasarala is all the things that you love about her as sort of like third in command. The fact that she doesn't put up with any bullshit, the fact that she doesn't want to talk about things, she just wants to issue orders and have them obeyed. That makes her a great third in command. And you love that she just gets things done. In fact, in season one, somebody says, "Why haven't you ever run for office?" Her response is, "I like getting shit done." Uh, all those same things about her personality, when you put her as number one in charge, they all become negatives. Uh, so that we wanted to do that. We wanted to take that same personality and move her from third in command to first in command, and just show how all of the elements that made her amazing as like the third person in charge become huge negatives when you put her as the first person in charge.
Yeah, she does feel like the person who should be the last in the room, not the one making the decisions as the last person in the room. But
Well,
yeah,
I mean, she certainly made a lot of decisions, but what she was really good at, and what we showed her early on doing, is she's the one who pulls the trigger. She's the one who is somebody says this needs to be done. She's the one who bullies everyone in the room to get it done. She's Rahm Emanuel. I don't know if you remember Obama's chief of staff in his first term. Uh, just a foul mouthed, aggressive person whose only job it was to make sure everybody did what the boss told them to do. And she was great at that. Rahm Emanuel was great at that. He was very abrasive. He was very, people didn't like him, but he got everything done that needed to get done. You would never want Rahm Emanuel as president. He would be a terrible president. And that's what we're showing with her.
yeah, that's I noticed. So later on, we're gonna get I mean, we have all the eyeless stuff, but I feel like you really gotta watch the whole season. It's kind of hard to jump in at episode 5 and know what's going on eyeless right now. But that's the beauty of all the episodes at once. But on Earth, it seems they have a democratic system that's similar to how the U.S. works now. Like it is the secretary. It's never explicitly explained, but it's implicit that the secretary general is also the commander in chief. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's more like the parliamentary system that you see in like England and Canada. It's that system where there are various parties. The party that wins the most votes forms a government, declares a prime minister, all of that.
Yeah, I don't think in the show that's kind of glossed over because you don't
It
really want
is.
to spend too much time on the
No, it's super boring.
intricacies of the politics. But and that's why Eva Sorella is she has to talk all the stuff that people want to hear as opposed to what she wants to get done, and that's the real issue here. But
Yeah.
another thing is, okay, talk about the zero G. There's so much zero G, and obviously it's not zero G, but just how does that happen, and how does it look so good and very believable?
Well, I mean, it looks more or less believable depending on circumstances and how much time we have. You can't hang your actors in harnesses for every scene. You just can't do it. It's even if you had the time to do it, it's incredibly uncomfortable. It's punishing to the actors. So we hand wave a little bit with the magnetic boots, so they stick to the deck
Yeah,
and they
the
can walk
sounds
around.
on them are very obvious, so it's like, how are you
Yeah,
walking in space? Like,
for sure. And then we do what we can to imply it in other ways. If somebody's walking around with magnetic boots, they still got, we'll have something floating behind them in the air or that kind of thing. And then
they'll
when we do
grab a
actually have
cup or something.
yeah, exactly. And when we do have to fly somebody, one of the tricks we do is we never fly them in the orientation they're actually in. So if you see somebody flying up towards you, we're almost always dropping them. And if you see somebody dropping towards you, then we're almost always flying them up because just having them move opposite to gravity creates this sort of weird weightless sensation that it's almost subtle. I mean, it's almost subliminal. You can't really tell why it feels weird and weightless, but it
Yeah, we're
does
seeing
on
it right
camera.
now. Like as she's getting up, then suddenly it looks kind of like this is a weird situation, but she's obviously very used to it. And
Yeah.
and with the talk more about so the Belters, there's a whole it's a whole society, and that's another thing of Wikipedia level science, I guess. Like this whole race of people is unable to walk on a planet because their bones will break, I guess, essentially, because they're not used to gravity. But I think another part is just the culture and the accent and all that. Where did that come from?
Yeah, so the language is created by an actual linguist who built the language from the ground up, named Nick Farmer. He's a guy who speaks he literally speaks 30 languages.
I don't even
Uh,
understand how that works.
I don't either. And like his brain just works differently from all of ours. So he took those 30 languages and he squished them together into a single sort of created language. And then there's another guy that we had who's a linguistics coach, who's like a accent coach for actors. He and Nick worked together to build an accent that would work for that. And then both of those things are filtered through each individual performer. So every actor brings sort of their own slight change to it, their own interpretation to it, which is fine because the belt is gigantic. I mean, if you just look at the amount of space in the solar system that is occupied by the asteroid belt, it's vast beyond comprehension. So every one of those stations would have kind of its own regional dialect. And so, it's fine that everybody kind of takes their own little take on it, but they all start from the same place at least.
Yeah, I like how well obviously Naomi is the best at it. You can tell when she's speaking to someone from the belt and someone not. Like the difference in the accent. She knows who she's speaking to, and that really comes through without like making it obvious. But
Yeah, it's code switching. It's people who were raised in another culture often find so. One of our PAs on the show was raised in Jamaica and lives in Canada and speaks. You would never know she'd been anywhere but Canada. Speaks exactly like any other Canadian, but has told me as soon as she gets back to Jamaica, she just slides right back into a Jamaican accent, and that's what Naomi's doing. Is she's code switching depending on where she is. If she's around a bunch of inner planets types, she slides into that inner planet sort of accent, and then when she's back home with her people, slides back into that accent.
Now we see. Well, here's another one of the zero G scenes as she's obviously not had a great day. Oh, she was shot. That's what happened here. But that's another one of the.
Naomi wasn't shot. Lucia was shot.
Oh yeah. That's who we're watching right now.
Okay.
Um, but it's the scene where where's our daughter, and then it is
Yeah.
revealed later on that she's gonna be an important plot point. But yeah, that was I don't believe it's in. I'm pretty sure it's not in this episode. But when they do the, we're gonna tow the ships. I won't spoil too much, but like they have to save the ships, and that was there extra work put into explaining that so it didn't sound like science magic. Because in the books, there's a lot of like technical explanation on why it can work, but it felt like there was more time put into figuring out how this is gonna work, just so it seemed plausible. Are there any other examples of stuff like that?
No. It really. Here's the thing: is the simplest explanation is if you're in orbit and you speed up, you go to a higher orbit. If you're in orbit and you slow down, you go to a lower orbit. That's as simple as it gets. And so if a ship is at a dangerously low orbit, what you need to do is speed it up. So one way to do that is you attach it to something else that can speed up, and you drag it to add speed and move it to a higher orbit, and that's all they're doing.
Yeah. I'm saying like the amount of time that was spent explaining that process, even though it's relatively simple physics, made it very believable. Like, we'll get 3 more hours and that's it. Like, but
Yeah. So what happens is the atmosphere of a planet extends out a lot farther than people think it does. And even ships and satellites and things like that, even in the real world, our satellites and our ships in low orbits scrape atmosphere, and it doesn't have to be very much. It can be just a few molecules per cubic meter of space. But even that little bit of drag slows you down, and as you slow down, you drop. And the more you drop, the more you slow down because you start hitting more atmosphere, and it goes bad very quickly once it starts to happen. And obviously, we've all seen it because satellites will fall out of the sky. I remember when I was a kid, Skylab came down, and that's all it is they're just scraping a little bit of atmosphere, and that tiny bit adds up. And if you hit enough of it, you will drop down to the point where I believe the technical term is catastrophic reentry.
yeah, that doesn't sound very safe. I think a quote from probably an astronaut or something that I heard was being in orbit is like trying to fall at the planet and miss, like
Yeah,
instead of being under your own power. Now we're back. We're at the scene where they kidnapped a couple of the RCE guards. So the logistics of this. So what's happened is the UN has just said, as they probably have throughout history, yeah, this is all ours because we have the guns. Um, that I mean, they don't say that, but it's kind of implied. And the Belters come to this planet. I I guess like without Mercury, this would all fall apart. It feels like it does give the feeling of there is no it's 16 hours or something like that in light time. What is it? I'm not sure the exact amount, but like 16 or so hours to get a message and then get a message back. So there's no
yeah,
way. Uh, it did give that really Wild West feel. And
yeah. I mean, when one of the things we talk about is when you were Britain and you were colonizing the North American continent, um, that was a multiple months long trip on a ship to get there. So if the people in the colonies kicked up a fuss and started shooting your troops, and you wanted to send more troops, they would get there like 3 months later. Uh, so the lag time between hearing something as a problem and reacting to that problem is enormous. And the result of that is it can kind of feel lawless because the reaction to any lawless act you take, it takes so long, for the repercussion to occur. You can get away with anything. And the other thing too is if you think about like the New World, North and South America, before Europe started colonizing it, the assumption that Britain and Spain and France and the Netherlands and all those places, the Dutch Trading Company, all that stuff. they just assumed if they got there first, it belonged to them. But there were people there. So where does that assumption come from? They would land and they would go, oh, England now owns this. And the fact that people already lived there was irrelevant to that. And it's the same kind of thing, you know, the Mars and Earth are sort of carving up the galaxy. Who gave them the right to do that? They never even questioned that they have the right to do that any
I
more than
isn't
the
it a little
British
on the nose? Isn't the company name like Royal Charter Energy?
Royal Charter
It
Energy.
literally says Royal in the name, so
Yeah.
pretty direct parallel. Oh, I love
Oh yeah.
this is the establishing shot of Denmark with the sea walls that are like 100 meters high. So is there ever explained? It's obvious like the sea levels rose and eventually it was handled, but is there ever any detail? Like I've read some of the novellas, but they don't go back far enough to like is there any detail on how society made it that far and
Yeah.
to
Well, I
this
mean,
point?
the big hint for that is that it's clumsy and it doesn't work very well, but there is sort of a semi-global government. That's the hint. Is the only way that humanity survived the economic and geologic or ecological catastrophe that happens from global warming is they all sort of banded together. It's the only way you make it through. So that's the world building there. Yeah, I doubt that we'll ever do that. I mean, it's
Yeah,
pretty
that'd be like
optimistic.
a Tolkien style prequel type of book would be.
Well, it's pretty optimistic that we'll actually do that. I'm much more a believer that we will continue our current system and drive it right into the ground.
Well, that's optimistic indeed. And I think if Avasarala was a couple hundred years earlier, she'd probably be somewhere around there. But she's in this part. It also talks about trade zones. So essentially, each continent has been split up. Country like no one talks about the United States, but they talk about Montana. There's still like smaller areas. So everything's kind of come together under this world government and parliament system. But there's still there are polls for a general election. So that is because of that system where even though you're voting for like your member of parliament, they have the leader, correct? Like that's why it's such a focus.
Yeah, the idea is that it is a vote of no confidence in the current government. And so if your government is voted out in a vote of no confidence, then a new government is voted in, and you wind up with a new prime minister. Is the way it works. So that's what's happening right now. There's Nancy Gao is saying we're not buying your bullshit of Australia, and I'm willing to take that to a vote.
And but she doesn't know the info. It's very easy to point out the current leader's mistakes, is what she's really exploiting in this. And that I like the back and forth because I mean politicians since the beginning of time have said, "Look at how bad a job this person's doing. I could do better." And then, well, what happens next? Doesn't always
Well,
do better, but
sometimes they're right, and sometimes they
sometimes
do better. Yeah, but
I think
not always.
that's where Evasarella's unwillingness to be the figurehead kind of really hurts her there. I like the line about what am I gonna do if there's another Eris incident? Same thing as last time. Like just handle it. Even though that's kind of a little bullshit there, but she
Yeah.
throws it in.
Well, politics is the art of inventive bullshit.
That's fair. I so this part um zoned out for a second. So how does food work? Like
What do you mean? How does food work?
I mean, in this scenario where you're on a trip for so long, like you have to go so long without resupplying, is there? It's literally you just have to store your food or grow it, right? There's no. I've never noticed any sort of like, I guess, somewhat science magic type of system. It's mostly, uh, soy, correct? Everything's like textured soy or something like that, made to taste something a little different.
Yeah, I mean there are things that are easier to grow and high in protein and nutrients. Those become a good basis for things. It's less soy. Soy requires that you grow plants. I mean, actually, the things that are super easy to grow are yeast. So you big tanks of yeast and then you sort of flavor it to be whatever, but it's basically just yeast proteins. And then the other one is, mushrooms. You can grow mushrooms anywhere. You just got to have a little shit in a dark, wet place, and you can grow mushrooms. But for the people on Illis, what they would have to do is get to a point where they start growing their own food, and you can't grow it in the ground there. The
Oh yeah,
ground there
that's
was
not really. Is that explained in the show really, or is it just kind of implied? I know in the books there's a lot more detail on the biosphere
yeah.
and.
So for anyone who's seen The Martian, that's the reason. Things don't grow in the ground unless there's all sorts of like microbes and other things in the ground, which is why Matt Damon has to go out and dig up everybody's shit and put it in the soil so that he can grow some potatoes. It's the same thing. You have to develop agriculture. You have to put things in the ground that will allow plants to grow, and it's not easy. And whatever you put in the ground is competing with what already was in the ground, and they won't be able to eat each other because all the proteins will be different. Nothing on an alien world is going to eat us, and nor can we eat anything on an alien world unless an incredibly unlikely situation comes up. But they would certainly compete for resources. If they both need water, they're both going to try to take up all the water. So now they're competing for whatever's in the ground that both can use. And yeah, I mean it's a complicated problem.
And so the Belters, like, they don't. I guess they have some experience growing food on. Well, they can grow some of it on asteroids and stuff. They're pretty industrious, but it is their first time on a planet. Actually, I'm gonna skip around because we're at the scene that's a little hard to watch, where the zero G kind of like surgery,
Yeah,
which really interesting because you don't really think about the effects of gravity and its implications on basic medicine. But yeah, this is definitely one of the scenes that makes it super believable. Like, yep, she's gonna die, and there's a lot of complicated issues here, and there's no fancy tech that's gonna help her. I mean, this is partially the you have a lot to live for, even though you've done bad things part of it, which is it's kind of a catalyst for that. But also, I thought just from the science standpoint, this was super interesting. If tough to watch, that was that was pretty rough the first time. And I'm for Alex, this it kind of put me off at the start until I realized the backstory. But the like Texan accent for people from Mars, but
well,
then
it's not everybody. It's one very specific
the
area
Mariner
of Mars.
Valley, the Texas of Mars, quite literally, right? Like, a lot of what was it? Indians and Texans mostly settled that area.
Chinese, Indians, and Texans settled it. And at first, I mean, a lot of other people settled later, but that was the first group. Yeah, and one of the things we talk to linguists about is where accents come from and where dialects come from, and they say it can come from anywhere, and it's really just what does everybody latch on to. And the idea there was that you had this big Texas contingent, and a bunch of people just sort of latched onto that accent.
It sounds like something Texans would do. They just throw.
And if you think about Mars as the first Wild West of space, there's a lot of romance to it. That there's a lot of affectation. I would guess that a big part of it is affectation. That we're the cowboys of space, and so we're going to kind of
Kind of want
play
to
into that.
distinguish yourselves from those on Earth, especially after maybe a generation or so, and you no longer like if you grow up on Mars, you don't want to identify with Earth, especially when the backstory is until Mars got their super drive right and their
Yeah,
technological advantage, um, from Solomon Epstein, by the way, the Martian side. I love the backstory how he's just dead, like he discovered it and then he died, which it doesn't have that romantic. It that was another thing that made it more realistic. Was like, oh, yeah, that's some really amazing science. Too amazing. Now he's dead. Like,
yeah.
um,
I mean, you ever watch Fat Man and Little Boy, the John Cusack character? Working on the nuclear cores for the bombs, and then lets a screwdriver slip, and he's just dead. The screwdriver slips, the two halves of the core come together, it gets blasted with radiation, and a week later he's melting in a hospital bed. Um, Discovery and invention has always been a dangerous thing.
and that's pretty much what Avasarala is saying here in the second half of the town hall meeting. So these people at the meeting here they seem to be, well, they're kind of political props for Nancy Gao, but So this, I guess the closest parallel to this is kind of like a town hall meeting where you take questions from your constituents and try to answer them, and you go back and forth. Is that is that kind of what's happening here?
Yeah, for sure. Except that, the people who can ask questions are all across the globe. So, most of them are sort of asking through, Skype,
Space Skype. Well,
space Skype.
actually, just regular Skype is kind of would be fine in this context. But I think I want to talk
Ether
more
Skype.
after the show because one of the questions is about, and I've read some of the novellas and a little more in the books talk about the undocumented, and then in coming books it becomes a little more relevant as well to an extent. I guess
Yeah.
coming as in season 5 and hopefully beyond. But so I had a question at the end of this. Sometimes I forget. So Nancy Gao was what was her position? Was she was the secretary of something, right, in the
Yeah, I believe,
administration?
if I remember correctly, she's like the Secretary of the Interior.
So she doesn't really have any information on the dangers of all the other systems and stuff like that, correct?
Yeah. I mean, she knows as much as anyone else in government knows.
I do like. There's a whole lot of, I guess, parallels that are as old as time where she skipped the line to get into, well, the education program and used her connections and all that. But she kind of turns that around pretty quick and shows the inequality on Earth in general. Um,
Yeah, we wanted Avasarala, her defining characteristic is she kicks ass. So we wanted to have that moment where she kicks ass and she's taken a bow for kicking ass, and then the other person does a judo move and flips her on her back. We wanted to give Nancy that moment where she just out judos Avasarala.
yeah, I will say until she, and it would have sounded pretty cliche, and it still comes off a little cliche, but before that, she felt kind of like a flat character. Like, I want to explore everything. But then you get a little bit of backstory, and it definitely fleshes it out, in my opinion.
But no, she doesn't want to explore everything. That's the thing is if you listen to what Nancy's saying, she doesn't actually care about exploration. What she cares about is she's got a huge number of people without jobs that are just a big drain on the economy. And what she's saying is, let's send them out there. Sure, some of them may die, but we're not using them anyway. If we send them out there, some of them will strike it rich, some of them will find good stuff. That's
It's the
great for us.
Wild West. We're
Yeah,
overpopulated. Now, that's a little bit of a. I guess I was too busy listening to what Avasarala was saying to really listen too close to Nancy. Is that.
yeah,
I don't remember
because
much of the election stuff in the books. Was that.
well, early on, she talks about half of our population doesn't have jobs. We've got a chance to give them something to do. Why don't we do that? Uh, and if you look at it from a really sort of cynical point of view, if people who aren't actually contributing to the economy go out into space and die, it doesn't really hurt. And if a few of them strike it
It's
rich
only.
and bring back gold, that's
It's only
awesome.
slightly worse than Belters dying, right? Like,
Right,
so,
exactly.
and now, okay, so this is what, for those who've read the books will know, but you brought the Inaros plotline starts
Yeah.
out, which isn't in the fourth book, I believe, was most of the season. But I thought that really, like, you set up a lot of season 5 with Inaros getting involved, and he looked exactly, great job on the casting, by the way, he looked exactly like I expected. Down to
Because
the
he's too
curly
pretty.
hair, like, I don't just a little, like, kind of a douchebag, but you can see why people follow him. So
Well,
that was super
I'll
interesting.
give you an Easter egg. So when Naomi, this was a couple episodes back, but when Naomi gets the warrant, the the um, the bounty that they put out on his head for $20 million, and she's looking at it, there's a list of his crimes there, and if you freeze frame on there, the bottom crime on the list is too handsome.
It's a capital offense.
Well, it is in the future.
Yeah, and,
That's
and I think in the books it's definitely harped on a little more. You've got all these beautiful actors here, so, but Belters have so many like physical deformities and issues with growing up in low or no gravity. So, being too handsome does seem like it would make some people jealous.
yeah, he's got to go.
He's got to go, but you got to catch him first. I do like later on the politics of the OPA are still like it's all very human, even though we've made like great strides, we're still fighting it out in a small town on another planet. And we got infighting between the people who control possibly the most important piece of real estate in the universe for humans. So that, yeah, that felt pretty realistic to me. I'm like,
Yeah,
you
we'll
guys.
always you stick three people in a room, and 10 minutes later, two of them will be fighting against the other one.
And then once the other one's down, they'll turn on each other. That's
Of
really
course.
the vibe of it here. Another one, and nothing in this episode, but we get a lot more of Mars. Like, I love the Mars story. Bobby just doing Bobby things and trying to be a moral person, and then realizing that's probably not going to be a great long-term move. But can you talk more about that storyline? I know we're doing the heart to heart here, but I think
Yeah, it's I mean it's the Soviet Union. It's the fall of the Soviet Union. It is a society that is a planned economy that is based around producing weapons and defensive things, and all of a sudden discovers that it fails as an economic system, and you have generals whose paychecks are bouncing, but they have a warehouse with a million AK-47s, and they're like, my paycheck just bounced, but if I
space
sell a million
AK-47s.
AK-47s for $10 each, I will have $10 million. That sounds great. And suddenly you've got, the AK-47 becomes the most ubiquitous weapon on the planet, because why not sell them? We've got a shit ton of them that we don't need, and we got no money.
It shows how fragile it becomes as soon as like there's any outside input. It's complete, like, you can believe it too, because it is they that summarized. Why would we put so much effort into making this planet somewhere you can walk outside and breathe when there are potentially 1,300 others where you could just do that right now? So
Yeah, yeah,
I that honestly, that a little bit of a parallel with automation today. Like, why are we still working in these like manual labor jobs? Well, that's part of, I imagine, the plot point of Earth, where half of people don't have jobs because what are you gonna do? Like, robots
yeah.
and computers can handle more than enough to provide food and shelter and all that. It's literally called basic, right? So it does. I would even just surviving to this point in civilization, I think, is a success, but it's still not like the United Federation of Planets. Like, let's go out and shake hands with every alien and explore strange new worlds type of near utopia. So I
Yeah,
think this is the best modern sci-fi for that.
well, I mean, humans have existed in basically this same physical form for about 150,000 years, and we have been stabbing each other with pointy sticks for the entire 150,000 years. We don't seem to change much on that front. I
Hmm.
mean, we stab each other less often now, but we still occasionally go into a
I think
post office with
statistically
an
more often,
AR-15
but as a percentage.
as a percentage. Yeah,
And our sticks have gotten very fancy. But
that's right. We just don't seem to get over our own bullshit. This is a PG-13 stream, right? As I recall, I could say.
uh, no, fuck off. All right.
All right. Well, I won't fucking say bullshit anymore.
This is a Christian Minecraft server. Uh, this I like. Okay, so we're at the scene where Holden's like, "I'm gonna be Holden," and it doesn't work.
Yeah,
That was I finally like, because it gets a little old in the first few seasons. Like, I'm just gonna lead with my heart, and everything's gonna eventually be okay. But here, Holden's like, I'm very important, and just listen to me, and we're good. And then they're like, nope, we're gonna start shooting at each other some more. Like, so can you
he's an
just talk
optimist.
more about Holden's arc, especially this season?
Yeah, he's an optimist. But he's growing up. Holden has the hardest part because his character arc is 9 books long, and the guy he was in
Spoilers.
book, yeah, I mean the
Holden's
guy he
still alive in the last book, guys.
well,
Maybe.
if you've read book 8, um, uh, the guy he was in book 1 is not going to be the guy he is at the end, and you got to show him transitioning. And I think uh, I think in some ways what we're trying to show this season is that uh, him having Miller inside his head is changing him in the same ways that being inside of his head is changing Miller. that they're sort of rubbing off on each other. And uh, he definitely he still has his optimism. He still walks over there and says, "Hey, I can solve this by telling everybody the truth." But he's also the guy who walks out of the ship and punches Mercury in the face.
That that was a great point. He does kind of have a sort of diplomatic immunity, which it does feel like if like a new governor comes over from Britain to the colonies, like probably shouldn't fuck with that guy.
It's
But
it's not diplomatic immunity. It's I have a gunship in orbit immunity.
that's
Uh,
that's fair. That's
if
fair.
you're the only person with a massive engine of war orbiting the planet, you can kind of get away with some shit.
You have a point to your stick, and it's right above them, which is why Mercury tries to negate that with the well, some special tactics, if you would.
Yeah.
Um, I do
He tries
like
to
Mercury. He he goes back and forth from being that stereotype. I mean, we talked about it earlier, but here is, I think, where he's very justified. You literally, he's got a good point. You blew up our shuttle and killed a bunch of our people, and now you took some hostage. And this is
yeah.
like, even though he's a total dick, he's got a point.
He's not wrong. Yeah, I mean, you can argue about his tactics and his reactions, but when he says what he's speaking the truth when he says the things that have happened. All of those things actually did happen, so he's not lying.
Yeah. And now we get to the dramatic cliffhanger, which isn't much of a cliffhanger when you can just watch the entire season in nearly one sitting, which I did. But I just like the CGI on, especially the Rocinante in almost all of the shots is so good. So just tell me, just break down what's happening there. The island exploded. Is it because we woke them up?
Yeah, so one of the things we talk about, and we actually have this is in the next episode, but this gets brought up that we're waking up this really old technology. In the next episode, spoilers. One of the scientists says, I had an old refrigerator in college, and I unplugged it when I went on break, and when I came back and plugged it in, it caught on fire. Old technology, when you turn it off and then turn it back on after a really long time, has a tendency to fail. And so you've got this ancient stuff, and it's being woken up, and some of it wakes up wrong and fails. And when it's a gigantic underground fusion reactor, when it fails spectacularly.
Yeah, that's also why they were able to kill one with a torpedo. Like it turned on, but it's still not the strongest thing after a billion years or so.
Yeah,
Uh, so there was a lot of development in that episode, like character development, and we didn't see any of Bobby, unfortunately, but overall character development. That's honestly one of the least action of any episode, I think. It's just a whole lot of this is what's happening, like battle lines being drawn, literally or figuratively when it comes to like an election. But we didn't see any of the OPA or on Mars. So before, like, I want to do like 1 minute split because this is the episode commentary part. Just talk about how you weave in what 4 or 5 separate plot lines depending on how you define it. How does that work, and like what kind of important things
that
go into that?
that's a long conversation. I mean, that's the writers' room
Well,
spend.
you have 60 seconds.
Okay, the writers' room spends months figuring out what the storylines are, and then at the end we sort of put them in consecutive order and decide which episodes need more of one storyline than others. And it's not a process that is quick or easy. It takes
Did
we spend 4.5 months a year doing it.
did being on Amazon and in like the binge watch fashion factor in significantly compared to the previous seasons?
It did factor in some important ways that I can probably not talk about in 10 seconds.
Fair enough. All right, so that was the episode commentary on The Expanse. We didn't talk much about the episode because there's so many other exciting things. Like, you got to go watch the series and get all the context. But thank you for that. And in the next part, we're going to talk more generally about sci-fi. Of course, we're going to bring the Expanse into it. I want a little bit more backstory on certain things. And then we're going to take live questions from Twitch chat, which is always something you can do. So that'll be fun. But so